Good morning. I guess you've figured out by now I'm not Pastor John. Pastor John and Cinda are in Texas celebrating the graduation of two of their granddaughters, one from high school and one from the University of Texas. And we know that they're enjoying family time, and we wish them safe travels on their return. Our guest pastor today is a longtime friend to many of us and pastor to us, Pastor Bill Hall, and we welcome him to the pulpit this morning as he shares the good news with us. I want to welcome each and every one of you. We're glad you're here. Just as CDC has recommended, at this time we are not required to wear masks. However, if you feel more comfortable doing so, you are welcome to do that. Those are our announcements this morning. Let us share together in worship. As forgiven people, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. May the peace of Christ be with you all. Now we're going to greet one another, and again, keeping safe. You can either wave, make eye-to-eye contact, or do an air hug. So will you please greet each other? I invite you to let the prelude prepare you for worship. Thank you, Karen. Will you please join me in affirming our identity in Christ with the prayer of St. Francis? Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is error, truth. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying to ourselves that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Those who are able, please stand as we sing together, Holy, Holy, Holy. Our scripture lesson today is from Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 through 18. Therefore, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed me, not only in my presence, but much more now in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure, doing all things without murmuring and arguing, so that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, in which you shine like stars in the world. It is by your holding fast to the word of life that I can boast on the day of Christ that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. But even if I am being poured out as a libation over the sacrifice and the offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. And in the same way, you also must be glad and rejoice with me. Pastor Bill.
Good morning. Welcome. I offer my own word of welcome to those here in person and those tuning in remotely now or later. You know, when I grew up in a small church, one of the first scriptures I learned was, where two or three are gathered, Christ is in the midst. Well, biblical scholars have gotten together, and in light of our new realities, we used to think that meant only in person. but now that scripture applies to people here and those watching remotely. One of the things I've experienced serving during this time and participating is how the borders have expanded. I've done Sunday school classes at the church we go to where people have tuned in on vacation from North Carolina. So as much as we want this to be over with, it has broadened our reach. One other comment before I start the sermon. When I was in seminary, we ministers were told to be mindful of the impact that we could have on a church. And recently, when John asked me to preach today, my wife reminded me the impact I had on this church the last time I preached here. The next Sunday, you shut down because of COVID. Let's not do that again, okay? Now, you shut down for good reasons, but I had forgotten that till my wife reminded me. We do want now to reflect on the Word of God, a portion of which we have heard. Our text for this morning is verse 13. It is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for God's good pleasure. Looking at this audience, I think I can assume that the name Helen Keller is fairly familiar to all of us. A hero in many ways. She was born in 1880 and at 19 months of age experienced an illness, which they were never certain what it was, and it left her deaf and blind. And I won't go into detail because we all know the story of the connection with people who helped her in spite of those limitations to learn, to read, to write, and to speak. And in fact, she ended up speaking in a number of countries and cultures. And in her adult years, she became an advocate, a prominent advocate, not only for disabled people, but for women's right to vote, for labor rights, and for world peace. And as one writer says, refusing to be locked in pity, Helen Keller invested her life in what we now refer to as working for the greater good. A friend of mine, in a newsletter article in which she used Helen Keller as an example, said, Helen Keller looked at her situations with hope. She lived an optimism that impelled her world forward rather than a pessimism that retarded it. She believed that the welfare of each is bound up in the welfare of all. Now, today we use the term, I don't know when it came into use, but this idea of working for or seeking the greater good, the capacity to work for the good of someone other than myself, not being caught by ego or narcissism, but able to see the larger world and to work in some way for the greater good. And the question then arises for us as people of faith, why and how are we able to work for the greater good, or whichever phrase you would prefer to use? And our scripture speaks clearly to that. The first part of our text says, it is God who is at work in you, enabling you to will. Now, this is a verb. The capacity to see a bigger world, the capacity to see beyond ourselves is a gift from God. That is clear in this scripture. Eugene Peterson, in his translation, The Message, translates this phrase this way. That energy, that ability to care about others is God's energy, an energy deep within you, God himself willing for you to want to work for the greater good. God's energy, an energy deep within us. In the second chapter of Joel, the familiar scripture, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. It is clearly that it is God who gives people a vision, a dream, and is inclusive. Young and old, male, female, all are given the gift, the capacity to care beyond themselves. Now, just before the passage that Cindy read for us is the familiar Christ hymn in Philippians that tells us in powerful poetry that Jesus was a servant, he was fully human, he humbled himself, and he became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. In other words, the very nature of Jesus Christ was and is to be a servant. And our calling as followers of Jesus Christ is to serve others. Christ said he came not to be served, but to serve. And my personal favorite book of the Bible is the book of James. You know, if someone asked me what kind of Christian you are, what kind of theology, instead of answering, well, I'm liberal or conservative or progressive or evangelical, all those labels and silos that we build, I like to say I am a book of James follower of Jesus Christ. James in the first chapter says to us, every generous act of giving with every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. James, as we well know, and I'll refer to him again in a few moments, was an advocate to live your faith, to act on it. And he was also clear that that capacity, as to use his language, was a gift from the Father of lights. I like that word, light. The insight, the capacity to see is the very nature of God. Now, the second part of our text says to us that it is God who is at work in you, enabling you not only to want to will, but to work for his good pleasure. In other words, the desire to act for others is a gift from God, and the capacity to follow through on that desire is itself a gift from God. It's also a choice. One of my favorite outlines, if I'm talking about forgiveness or love or whatever, is it's a gift and a choice. Love is a gift, but we choose whether or not to embrace the love of God, and we choose whether or not to share that love with others. A gift and a choice. Some years ago, and I don't remember now why, my primary care physician said, I think what's going on is XYZ, but I'd like to refer you to a specialist just to confirm, and to get ahead of the story, the specialist confirmed. But it was a doctor I didn't know anything about him other than my doctor sent me there. And when I went there was a little anxious. I went up and identified myself at the window. And then I went and sat down waiting to be called. And then I looked up and saw there was a large sign to the side of the registration window. And it said, and I checked with the doctor later, he created this quote and put it in large print. Nothing the doctor can do will make up for what patients will not do for themselves. Got it? My mother was a nurse. Now, she didn't use names at home, but I can remember her going, they won't take their medicine, they won't do what the doctor wants, and they're fussing at us because they're back in the hospital with the same condition again. The moment I read that, I thought, I like this guy. I like that kind of, this is the way it is. I'm a doctor, I got something to offer, but I'm not the great physician. I'm not a magician. You have to do your part. You have to act on what we decide together is in your best interest medical. Now, I want to share a couple of personal examples, but with some hesitancy, because I don't share them to say I've got it together or this is how you should do it, but rather in the good old church language as a testimony to what God can call us to do and equip us to do. That's the spirit in which I want to share a couple of things. My wife and I live in South St. Pete, Pinellas County. And soon after we moved there 7 years ago, I joined, and now Sybil has joined, an organization countywide called FAST. That's an acrostic for Faith and Action for Strength Together. It is a countywide, interfaith, nonpartisan community of about 44 worship communities working together for social justice. Sybil and I are on the affordable housing team, and there are other teams for, and I like this, instead of saying mental health, they now say behavioral health, because one of the things that team works on is removing the stigma that is there for some people if you speak of mental illness. There are people working to create a central resource. There's another team working on criminal justice reform, another that has made great progress in reducing the number of school children arrested and given a criminal record, and instead offering them alternatives to seek to understand what's driving that behavior that is disruptive and at times even destructive. And I'm also a habitat volunteer. I'll tell you quickly one story that encapsulates why I love to swing a hammer for Habitat. Some time ago, we've been off since COVID. They're just now letting volunteers back. But before COVID, I was working on a project. We had a supervisor, and during a break, some of the volunteers were new. So the supervisor, while we were taking a break, told him the Habitat story. And when he finished, he said, "Bill, you've been doing this for a long time in Manatee County in here. You probably got a story to tell." And I said, "Well, recently, as often as I can, I go to the dedication of a house I've helped build. So I go to this house dedication, and I'm positioned near the front door. We have a prayer for the house because I had another commitment, and I wanted to get in first, look around, and leave. I walk in, and all of a sudden, this little kid grabs my hand, a little 6-year-old black boy. His mother is getting the house, and he drags me down the hallway and stops at his house is empty of furniture because they haven't moved in yet. And he said, "For the first time in my life, I'm going to have my own bedroom." And he was so excited. The supervisor said, "Bill, I think I can go you one a little better." That's a good story. A couple of weeks ago, Bill, I was at the dedication of a house I'd worked on. We're inside looking around afterwards, celebrating, a gang of us in the kitchen. And again, this little boy, his mother's getting the house, said, "Everybody, listen, I got something to say." "Okay, Johnny, what is it?" He said, "For the first time in my life, when I'm bad, I have a bedroom for my mother to send me to." You think about it. What do we take for granted? You know, my kids always had a bedroom. I assume I had one growing up, shared it with my brother, but there was a bedroom. It opens your mind. This is the United States of America in 2021. That particular story involved 3 people living in a 1-bedroom house with a leaking roof that the landlord wouldn't repair. You get the story. Again, it's not about how great I'm doing. It's that God is at work motivating people to build safe, affordable housing. Now, recently, when FAST was meeting and we're working on some projects, one of the ministers in the group told this story. We meet on Zoom, of course, and his congregation has become very fatigued. COVID and Zoom fatigue. I heard that term, Zoom fatigue, recently. And feeling helpless in the face of gross injustices and frightened by the rising anger and demeaning communications, especially by national leaders. And in a sermon, and knowing him as I do, he loves them dearly. What he said to them was, "Stop sighing. Stop going, oh, this is awful. Now that could sound like a criticism. He meant it as, if all we do is sigh and regret and do not take action, nothing will change. There's a place for lament. There are psalms that are powerfully expressive of lament. But there's much in Scripture that invites us to be honest, to lament, but also at some point to stand up and walk and face into the challenges that are before us. Now we have a choice in how we act on our willingness to work for the good of others. And here I want to offer a note of caution. I've been saying to you that Scripture says act. Faith without works is dead. But not everything that comes into my mind as a good idea is necessarily what God wants. Now, I'm going to use a couple of somewhat extreme examples, but it's still a word of caution for us. On January the 6th, a number of those attacking our democracy and our Capitol carried signs that appeared to be representative of Christianity. Jesus saves, and other signs, believing that God was calling them to seek to bring down our democracy. Instead, Jesus was weeping. Another example is the so-called prosperity gospel. You may be familiar with it. It teaches that if you really have genuine faith, you will be wealthy and healthy, sometimes called the health wealth gospel. Now, let's be honest, there are some scriptures you can pull out that seem to say that. If you love God, everything, you're going to prosper in everything. But there are other scriptures that counterbalance that. To me, that is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. Jesus didn't teach that we would become financially wealthy if we follow him. Instead, Jesus modeled and calls for us to sacrifice for those who live on the margins of our society and world. There needs to be discernment, and I find this is usually best done corporately. Some of you will remember in the past Family Promise. Kirkwood participated in it. This was a ministry in Manatee County for homeless families. I was involved in that and in leadership. And there were at times, there were appropriate, strong discussions and debates about how best to use our resources, our money, our volunteers, and the other resources we had, and even at times, some difficult conversations about setting boundaries and limits for some residents. We needed discernment. Micah 6:8 says, he has shown you what you are to do. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. Nowhere in the Bible do I find a checklist for knowing if you're doing justice. There's some information, but it doesn't say, okay, Palmetto Presbyterian Church, in this time in your life, this is what it means for you to do justice. That's not there. We have to search. We need discernment, and again, I think we do it best. And when the Presbyterian system works as it's supposed to, it equips that there's a larger mind involved in discerning how we are to do justice, to be kind, and to honor God. The desire to serve others is a gift. Our serving others is a choice. Now, I don't know if this is helpful or not. I like to play with words and study their etymology, their origin. And you know this. In the English language, the word will, W-I-L-L, is a verb and a noun. As a noun, it means something that we're capable of. We can have a will. We speak of people who are strong-willed. Thank goodness I'm not that. But anyway, it's a capacity to want to do something. And it's a verb, meaning we act on that urging. It is something we have and something we do. By the way, this time, for the first time in working on this passage, I looked it up in Greek, and the same thing is in the biblical Greek. The verb and the noun come from the same root word in Greek, just like in English. So there's a noun and a verb in both English and Greek. I like that it has two different roles grammatically. More importantly, it is an important concept for us to understand. Now, does anybody remember what we were told growing up in a proverb? What is used to pave the road toward hell? Good intentions, right? I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but you get the point. Good intentions in and of themselves do not accomplish anything. They do not get us where we need to be. Just wanting is not enough. Now, a couple of biblical illustrations of acting on what one desires. We know the story in the Bible of the sparing of Moses. Why was Moses' life spared even though they lived in captivity in Egypt, and even though the Pharaoh had declared that all male Jewish babies were to be killed? The Jewish midwives would said, we'd never get there in time. They're already born. It's too late by the time we get there. They were lying, civil disobedience, but they cared about preserving life, and they did that in the face of potential severe consequences for themselves. Jesus Christ, I've already alluded to this, is our most powerful example. His whole life was about moving, going, being with people, being interruptible, letting someone touch his garment and stopping and healing her, feeding the hungry, healing the sick, welcoming the outcast, and equipping and commissioning the disciples also to serve those in need. Back to my favorite book, James. Some selected quotes. Be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. Faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. Religion that is pure and this is, as far as I know, the only place in Scripture that religion is defined. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for widows and orphans in their distress, to care for those on the margin, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. And then the final quote, show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness, born of wisdom. I love that phrase. Gentleness, born of wisdom. We do need discernment. We do need wisdom. It's not always clear how best to help someone. Now, there are also contemporary examples. Even in this pandemic, we know medical people sacrificing their own safety and in sometimes losing their own lives to care for others. People collecting food to feed the hungry. Teachers knowing that the students who can't come to school are going to be without a meal and somehow getting it to them. There are many examples of how people have been courageous and creative in serving others. And another very personal one, and I spoke to Don Decker and got his permission to share this. Over the years I've known him, I've been captivated, and I assume you've had these conversations, listening to him talk about his engineering students doing projects to help particularly disabled people. And I had a phone conversation with him to remind myself of the details, all of which we can't go in. But these are college students, aspiring engineers, who want to put that engineering information and capability to work for, again, the greater good. And they would choose a project. Just a couple of quick examples. A student wanted to be able to paint, but he couldn't move his arms, and so they created a device that would move his hands so he could do that. Another man could not reach things on his desk, and I love this one. The students wanted and developed a trigger mechanism triggered by eye movements. In other words, when he looked at something, the device would move to it. I don't know how to do that, but they applied their skill to learn how to do it. And another one I love, they made it so that disabled people could drive a go-kart. Again, things that many of us take for granted. A powerful example of how that will can be translated into work for the greater good. And I know this church, maybe you still do, you help a elementary school. What school is it? Manatee Elementary. I've heard the stories of your collecting things for them. And by the way, if I may have a moment to advertise, I talked about FAST in Pinellas County. You've got a sister organization being formed in Manatee County. At the moment, it is being referred to as Manatee Justice Ministry. Again, seeking churches to work together for social justice. If you're interested, I can connect you with the organizer in this county. Each of us as individuals have a call and a capacity to work for God's good pleasure by serving others. Frederick Buechner, in his book, The Sacred Journey, talking about what we search for as human beings, the lead-in is we are searching for at least these things. We search for a self to be. We search for others to love. We search for work to do. We search for meaning and making a difference. Again, in Philippians, the first chapter, live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Now, when I was in high school, after high school, I became the first one in my family to go to college. But during high school, I was lamenting to my mother's mother, my grandmother, that I didn't think I could afford it. And she said to me, Bill, where there's a will, there's a way. I didn't believe her, but she was right. I made it. And through graduate school. The good news is, the gospel of God in Jesus Christ is there is a will and there is a way. How will we receive God's gift and how will we choose to act? In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.
Let us pray. O holy and almighty God, your majesty and power are revealed to us in so many ways. In the vastness of a starlit night sky, in the quiet stillness of an early morning sunrise, in a gentle breeze and the lapping of waves during a walk on the beach, in the vibrant colors of a sunset. Loving God of grace and compassion, you touch our lives and our hearts in the radiance of a smile, the warmth of a hug, the joy of laughter, and the gentleness of a tear. We give you thanks for the many ways you make yourself known to us. And on this Memorial Day Sunday, we remember with gratitude and affection those who have offered their safety and well-being and even their lives to serve others. Veterans, military members, police and all first responders, doctors, nurses, and the support staffs of our hospitals and long-term care facilities. We remember them with gratitude and respect, with our humble, silent appreciation. We come together now to join our hearts and voices to pray as Jesus taught his disciples to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. I invite all who are able to please stand as we sing our closing hymn, Blessed Assurance. Benediction. We go nowhere by accident. Wherever we go, God is sending us. Wherever we are, God has put us there. God has a purpose in our being there. Christ who dwells within us has something he wants to do through us where we are. I invite you to believe this and to go in the joy of God's grace, the joy of God's power, and the joy of God's love. Following the benediction response, I would ask you to be seated and listen to the playing of the postlude. And at that time, I would invite the elders of the church to join me and Pastor Hall at the rear of the church so we can greet you on your way out.